Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get our meeting started for this date of September the 25th. And we welcome everybody here tonight, those that are watching as well as in the audience with us. We'd like to begin our meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. As we go through our meeting tonight, as a reminder, may we interact with each other with respect and dignity and patience and charity. And anytime I don't, call me out on it. So there we go. With that, this is a special meeting. We have a couple of items that we do have to make some decisions on. So we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and I'll ask Miss Mary Mills to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Colbert?
Here.
Commissioner Treadwell?
Here.
Commissioner Stanley?
Here.
Commissioner Werner?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Shamrock?
Here.
Commissioner Wilson?
Here.
Mayor?
Here. Announcements from the interim city manager, please.
You know what, just one quick thing, as I don't know the last time I've updated the commission. If you recall, we had a resident come and talk about the whole discussion about M37 that started a number of years ago. I'm getting ready to send a letter along with the Grand Traverse County Road Commission to see if we can't get those conversations started back up. It's not a commitment to anything or anything like that. I just know that was something you guys continue to get asked about, and just letting you know that that is going out this week.
Okay. Thank you. Announcements from the city clerk or the deputy city clerk.
Meetings scheduled for this week are the Act 345 will meet Tuesday, September 26th at noon here at the committee room. Again, we're always looking for individuals to submit applications for expiring terms and vacancies on various boards and committees. And just a friendly reminder, sign up for that e-newsletter that we have.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, our first topic for the consideration is a consideration of approving a request from Up North Pride to allow it to serve alcoholic beverages in the open space for their event that I think takes place this Saturday, which is September the 30th, 2023. It was the clerk's office usually, it's an application. We have to approve it.
An event application. This is very similar to how the Cherry Festival offers alcoholic beverages. The current policy only allows beer and wine, and we have done this in the past for Up North Pride. This is the third year in a row for the request.
So the difference is more than just beer and wine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Pretty simple, straightforward. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that the City Commission authorizes the sale and service of alcoholic beverages in the open space as part of Up North Pride's Silent Disco and Drag Party.
Support. Okay, we have a motion and support. Anyone that would like to make any comment under this? Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. The next item is discussion regarding the next steps for filling the city manager's vacancy. As we all are aware, Mr. Marentet made a very courageous decision to not pursue the offer to become our next city manager. I know it was a lot of thought and consideration he gave to himself. And so I'm much happier that he made a decision, that brave decision, instead of coming in and all of a sudden 6 months down the road, as I used to tell people, as you think he died and went to hell. Mm-hmm. That's no fun for the individual, nor is it good for the community or the people that are trying to work with. With that, I did contact Ms. Sell and asked and to fill her in on that, and it was her responsibility to contact the other candidates as to whether they would like to still remain to be considered. Mr. Chris Forsythe let her know this morning and us know that he is not interested in pursuing the position. Although Mrs. Liz and whatever her name just went out of the back of my
Vogel.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Vogel's name. She is still interested in pursuing that. Miss Sell is not here, but she is watching. If we have a question that we would like to ask her, I'll give her a call, put her up to the microphone, and we can take it from there. The options that she sees at this point, I know she sent in an email to us today. One is to move forward to engage in negotiations with Ms. Vogel immediately, and she is willing and flexible to proceed. We could have her come back for a second interview with the commission with the specific task of laying out her plan for the next 6 months, and then we can make a decision whether to proceed or not proceed at that point. Also, we would just put the decision on hold until after the elections, at which point that commission could move forward with Ms. Vogel or interview her and other additional candidates or just relaunch the entire search. Those are her 3 broad recommendations. I did email her back asking that if we were to want to proceed in either fashion, how much notice would she have to give her current employer? And being in the profession that she is in, any manager of their salt would at least have 30 days, usually more than that. For her, the answer would be anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. It depends on what her and her current employer can work out. But it appears like that when you put all that together, even if you can move at lightning speed, it would be probably the 1st of December or thereabouts before she can really begin. She can really begin if everything were to fall in place on time. So that's just something to keep in thoughts as we go through our discussion. We also Nate came to us when we were meeting the other morning after being, about an idea that may or may not happen. It's up to us, really, that if we wanted to continue with his services for much longer, or we may have to. At this point, I would say at the minimum, Nate will hopefully will be able to remain with us up at least until December 1st. After that, because of a lot of other considerations in his personal life, the most important one is his family. And of course, he also happens to run a business. If you don't realize that we're not paying him directly, we're paying his business. And when he leaves here, then he's got to create other business. We're glad to have you, don't get me wrong. The other idea was that what if, he were to stick around longer, maybe 6 months, and give the new commission time to get on board, get acquainted, then start the search over again. And go with that path. There are some changes that he would need to make or would to have consideration of, and that is that he can't be up here every week. He's got a family, 3 young children that are kind of missing their dad more often, and that's probably more important than anything else that can happen around here. So those are our very broad options, and so I'm open to having the discussion of what everyone thinks we ought to be trying to pursue with next. Ms. Stanley, I see your hand up already.
Sure.
Okay.
So I want to reiterate that when we met last to discuss this, the top 3 finalists, to my mind, were within millimeters of each other.
That is correct.
And for honest, if I'm being frank, at each stage of the interview process, a different person of that 3 was the front runner. There was someone after our group interview that was in the lead in my mind. After the one-on-one round robins, there was another person, and then finally, when we got the feedback from staff and community, another person. I would want to reiterate that I would have been comfortable with any of the 3. I think Ms. Vogel is a very strong candidate. I do also appreciate the hybrid approach that was suggested, that our interim city manager could stay on in some capacity and help refocus us on some of the back to basics that we really need to be working on. And I think that could be a very helpful transition if we were to move forward with Ms. Vogel.
Okay. Okay. Would you think it'd be helpful to have Ms. Vogel back, let's say, and fortunately for us, if that's what we'd like to do. She doesn't have to come a great distance. You know, she's only one county over, or kitty corner, or how we want to do that. Come back and meet with us again, and with that idea of saying, what would we do? What was her first 6 months would be like? And that way, even the candidates come in and listen to what she's planning to, you know, knowing it's going to be a learning curve for everybody. So we take it from there. Is that an idea, or?
I think that could be helpful for the community. I don't know, I'm comfortable making a decision without hearing that, but
Okay.
with respect for the people who are running for city commission, and at least 2 seats will be changed up here, I think that there could be value, especially with adding transparency to this part of the process.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to kind of chime in a little too. I said when I voted on the 11th that actually Ms. Vogel was my first choice, that Benjamin was right up there too, and it's kind of back and forth between the 2 of them, but it was staff at the end that pushed Benjamin over Liz Vogel for me. So I don't at all think that the fact that she's the one who has continued monitoring what's going on here and still wants to be a part of it, that makes her any less of a candidate, or that we shouldn't give it very serious consideration of hiring her. I guess my thought on the 6th-month plan and having her come back, again, I'm fine acting today or in the near future, and maybe as part of a transition, we could have her come in and kind of like work out, again, a hybrid of coming in and presenting a little of what's coming forward. I wouldn't even mind if it didn't make an official handoff until the first of the year, just because once you get between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we only meet 2 to maybe 3 times. It's usually kind of cleaning up stuff before the end of the year. And so maybe working on some kind of a hybrid that looks like that of who's here and when, and also like was always available before, of knowing that Nate can't be up here every week, but that there's contracts and assistance available and time to help to transition. So I think that there's some options there that we could look at, but I guess I wouldn't say 6 months down the line, the city manager position isn't cut and dry. Even if you read every article in the Record Eagle, it tends to be, or any news source, it tends to focus on the major policy issues that we're debating up here, but there's an entire staff behind this. There's systems that are in place, there's structure that's in place behind it that's also incredibly important, and I think that unless you're in the mix of it, you don't fully understand. That was one advantage with when Benjamin was selected, that lifted a little bit because he'd been part of that system, but even if it had been somebody coming over from the county, it's still a totally different structure, and I would be saying the same thing. And so I guess I would say I don't want us to discount Ms. Vogel at this point, but I think that maybe a little bit of a stretch on a transition process, and then giving some time to kind of let the community get to know her isn't a bad suggestion either. So I guess I'm not giving a definitive answer, but furthering the conversation a little bit for options, rather than has to be 6 to 8 weeks or has to be a presentation.
Yes, Mark.
Oh,
You
well,
go, ma'am.
I'm comfortable with making the decision this evening, but if it's a question of if we need to wait for the next commission out of respect for them to make that decision, or if it'd be more respectful to not put that on them, I'm either way.
Yeah, I concur, especially with, sorry, I didn't mean to point, with Commissioner Stanley. And I see Nate Geinzer, he's a resource, but a resource to our next city manager. And so I would defer to the next city manager, potentially Ms. Vogel. It's her decision how much she is interested in using Nate as a resource, not our decision or the next body's. We can give our input and our recommendations, but I see it as her decision how much of a resource to use him as and for how long, because in any entity, when you're hiring the executive director or equivalent, like they're the person in charge, and we need to be able to give them or that person the depth, latitude, whatever direction you want to call it, to run things as they see fit. Like if we decide this is the right person for the job, I feel like we need to be able to allow them to make those decisions, and that even gets to the duration of the transition. Like I feel like if we decide, say on Ms. Vogel, we should open the door to her and invite her in, and when she's ready to be here, she's here. If she decides, you know what, I'd rather wait till January 1st. But if that's the decision we're making, I don't see that, again, that we should be saying, yeah, but let's wait and let a few other things, like if we decide, let's go all in and decide and leave it up with her input and preferences on when she would potentially start, as well as the resource, Mr. Geinzer, and it's very generous of him to offer to be a resource.
Yeah, thank you.
Those are my thoughts.
Okay.
I'm going to counter that just a little bit. I was really, at the beginning of the day, tending towards having Nate stay until the spring and starting the search over then. I don't think that's where I am now. I really appreciated the letter from Liz indicating that she wanted 2 months. And I actually think starting at the beginning of 2024 would be great if that's something that works for her. I would like to see the new commission, given that there will be 2 new faces at least. I would hate to see a new manager and a new commission both starting on the same day, which is basically what would happen if it happens in November. And I feel like there's too much uncertainty in roles at that point. So I am comfortable offering it to Liz and asking if January 1st is good, and if it's good for you, and if you're willing to, not you.
I know it's not me. I'm not in the picture here.
If he's willing, and I love the idea of him making himself available to Liz with the things that he has learned in the months that he has been here. It's like drinking from a fire hose when you get here. And it'd be great if he was able to help out. So that's where I am. As far as coming back for a second interview, I don't know.
Okay, all right.
No.
It's just one of those options.
Yeah.
Yes, I was coming into this in favor, especially before Mr. Forsyth sent an email to us, of bringing candidates back for a second interview and potentially looking at the list that Amy had brought forward to us of 13 candidates and giving that a second look. I had dug back through and tried to see if anybody in particular stood out, but then I am reminded, and looking back over my own notes, looking back over the tape, of how there were 3 candidates that truly shone to the top, and Liz Vogel was my first pick. I would be confident that she can do the job well, and I'd say it's up to her what point she would feel most comfortable starting at. She doesn't have the advantage of an internal candidate of being able to effectively start day one, but the fact that she is geographically close means that if there's, say, a transition period when she would be being in the office 2 days a week before her official full-time start date, that would be a bit easier than it is for Mr. Geinzer.
And sorry, you just brought up something that clarified a point that I think I was slightly rambling and not making well, which is that was why I was saying if we had a first of the year start, that there might be that opportunity that she could come a couple days a week, maybe overlap with Nate on some of those. I think one issue that we do have to address, and I think as a conversation we'd have to have, is empowering Nate to probably hire a candidate for, if there's a qualified candidate to run the treasurer department. There's some pressing time issues there. And given her experience, though, if this contract is voted on and the timing works out, maybe she could be looped in just to observe or I think that's up to Nate and Liz Vogel to discuss between them. I think I would empower Nate, though, to do that, given that time sensitivity. But I just think that forcing a start date, and again, I'm open to however that could look, if that's what negotiations are for, could be you're asking somebody to start when people are taking holiday breaks, when we're not meeting as frequently, and it could be a good time to ease in a little bit. But part of what was raised, and I don't want to dismiss it, is that Nate has been working on getting some of the house in order, and I think a few more weeks / couple of months to do that and have that conversation with Liz during the transition would be helpful to both the city, the staff, and to Liz herself. I agree with Tim. There's a lot that we're hiring a new city manager to give them in complete trust, But I've also seen and experienced and know people who have experienced in major roles a transition that isn't as smooth. And I think the smoother we can make this, the more open we can make this as we negotiate, the better that will be.
All right. Ms. Vogel was one of my top picks of the three. You know, they were all three of them. As I said at the last go-around, I could flip a coin and take either one of them, any of them. It didn't, but, and it just came that part of me, that with Benjamin, it was more of like the thought of an internal candidate that we felt like we could be comfortable with and he can learn, and we should always give to the best of anybody's ability, whether it's us or further down the pike of other department heads. If an internal candidate meets all the standards, we should always try to do that. That's just right for the organization, in any organization. At this point, I would concur with moving forward with Ms. Vogel and giving her the offer. We'll see if we can come to, you know, and leaving it up to her when she'd like to start. One of the beauties between November and in the new year, as I always used to call it, is everybody's in holiday mode. So you're not going to be as busy, and it may be just as good time for someone to start, kind of ease in, is not as intense as what happens right after the first of the year when things really need to start moving. So at any rate, no matter when you start, you're going to be drinking from a fire hose. Haven't been there. Even when I was in interim for 3 times, you're still drinking from a fire hose. Even though you know you're not going to be there for more than, it's still a fire hose. So it's just part of the business, and they know, and people that have been in the business know that, and that's fine. So even when you're not in the business, you go to a new job, you're still drinking from a fire hose. So it doesn't, it's just the way it is. So hopefully she's been through it enough that she understands. Okay. Well, let's put a motion on the table to, I don't know if we put
Do we have a suggested motion between our clerk and our attorney to make sure it's right?
I think, oh, did you already type one up?
We did
Sarah's
not.
on
For there.
I wish we had the last one.
But
We could
before we
do it
do
again.
that-
Did you have one typed up?
Before we do that, Mr. Geiser, did you have anything you wanted to add after our conversation here that we should know?
Are you putting me on the spot here or getting a little comfortable?
No, just,
No, I'm here to be a resource.
Okay.
I mean, I can deal with a little bit more uncertainty as far as my timeline. It's just, if it's going to go a while, having a date is helpful for a number of different reasons. The only other thing I would stress is, as you all move forward and looking where the motion may go and you enter into negotiations, I appreciate, I can't remember who made the comments about the staff. They've been through over 6 months of uncertainty, and it's even more in the last couple weeks. And so anything that can be done to give this staff some stability and this community some stability is going to do everybody a huge favor. So if the path that you are going on is what you believe does that, I fully support it and do whatever I can to make sure it's a smooth and successful transition.
Thank you.
I agree, thank you.
And be there afterwards as needed. So, okay, thank you. All right, did you have something for us?
I do.
I figured you did.
So I kind of based this off the last motion, so that Elizabeth Vogel be selected as the finalist for the position of city manager and a conditional offer of employment be extended, and further that upon acceptance of the offer of employment and successful background check, that the city attorney and or mayor pro tem to negotiate a proposed employment agreement with Elizabeth Vogel, with such agreement to be brought back to the city commission for authorization.
So moved?
Got a motion and support. Thank you. Okay, is there any questions or comments from the public? Thank you. All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Okay, thank you. Ms. Sell, I know you're watching on TV down there. Would you please give Ms. Vogel a call and let her know? We would appreciate that. Thank you.
That is
As
a
I'm sure she's not watching.
well, if that is a
I'm sure
21st
she's not,
century
but
business.
still, it's Mrs. Sell that's going to be doing the contacting, not us at this point. But thank you very much. Okay, all right. Okay, we appreciate everyone getting through that. Okay, we laid everything on the table, and that's good. All right. All right, next we have a a presentation from Mrs. Yarrow Brown as well as from Warren Call is really to provide a presentation regarding housing tools and housing in the housing needs assessment. So, Ms. Brown, are you going to lead this? Well, that's wonderful.
I'm going to start off, and I also have Tracy Davis with me. She is my Manistee County Housing Ready Program Director, and so she's going to help as well. So thank you for having me. I know you have a lot going on, and so giving some time to talk about these, the housing needs assessment and the tools is really important, and I thank you for the time. So many of you already kind of got a preview or have seen the housing needs assessment, but I just wanted to provide some context to it. It was a 10-county study, and it focused on demographics, economics, and then really looking at the housing supply. And some of the conclusions and recommendations also include housing gap estimates, so how much is needed for rentals and then for for-sale units in each of the 10 counties. And the city of Traverse City did opt in for a community assessment that did give numbers for the city of Traverse City. I'm just going to go over a few charts today. Keep in mind it is about a 35-page report just for the county, and then the whole report in general is about 600 pages. So if you want to read it or come to my office, it's quite heavy and available. I also just want to set the context for what we talk about at Housing North and Many when we talk about affordability. Affordability is relative, and we don't want anybody to be paying more than 30% of their income on housing in general, regardless of what you make. In our region, on average, people pay about 50% for transportation and housing, and that's from the H&T index. It's not kept up to date, but I think the last time I looked at it was the 2020 data. So on this chart, which came from Jim Tischler at the State Land Bank, it shows where some of those terms come from when we talk about affordability and what resources are available. And we work across the income spectrum at Housing North, so we want everybody within this chart to be able to have housing. But most importantly, some of the attainable housing, there is a lack of resources to be able to incentivize or bring in housing in that 80 to 120% of the area median income. And you'll see in the data that I show that we broke those down into different categories of the area median income that are kind of based on new funding opportunities. So,
Back up 1 minute. The AMI comes from HUD.
Yes.
Okay.
So when I'm talking,
And it transfers down to the states then?
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you. All right, thank you.
And I should note that on our website, if you go to data, there is a spreadsheet where we put a lot of this data electronically, and it does have a spreadsheet for each county and the AMI. And on average, we're talking about a family of 4 on average with these numbers. But it does depend on the number of people in the family, and it goes all the way up to a family unit of 1 to 8 on that chart.
But I can clarify on that it is by county, even though, say, Traverse City might be different than the whole of Grand Traverse County.
Yes. And to confuse things even more, they talk about a different number in the report, but I'm not going to go there. So we're going to focus on AMI today. And just to show this chart, you can see this is similar to probably what you saw in some of our other data assessments, but you can see the need for housing is the greatest in Grand Traverse County. And then this breaks it down by home ownership and rental units. And you can see that some of the highest bar charts on the lower right are for those making less than 50% of the area median income. But there is a need across the spectrum. So we're aging in our region. I don't know if you've known that, but this chart is for Grand Traverse and Traverse City, but if you look at the region as a whole, you kind of see very similar trends. So in this case, you're seeing some growth among older millennials and seniors, but we're also seeing a decrease in some of the populations in the 35 to 54 in Traverse City, and then in Grand Traverse County, it's slightly different. So when we look at this report, we also want to think about, demographics and where people are coming from and what type of housing they might need. There's also a chart I didn't include in here because it's so busy, but it shows the occupations that people make and whether or not they can own or rent in all of our 10 counties. And I can tell you that the majority of that chart shows red X's instead of green check marks. And I can share that out after this report. So the numbers. We had the consultant look at it in 2 different ways. So the first chart is just doing a fair share analysis, so looking at the needs in Grand Traverse County and creating a fair share analysis, and that does show a lower number. But in general, in this methodology, Traverse City, now this is just Traverse City, needs about 2,200 units. And in this case, the majority of the rental units are for those making 50% of the AMI or less, and then the for-sale units, the highest number there is for those in what we call the missing middle, or the 80 to 120 of the AMI.
The second way, he actually did a gap analysis, just like the county report, and that did come across with some different numbers. And you can see some of the methodology he uses here, where he's also looking at what's in the pipeline and then a step-down approach. So a lot of times people aren't able to move within the space because there isn't units available. So in this case, the rental gap, I have my totals on the next slide, I apologize. The rental unit was about 1,400 units, and the for sale was about 1,819. And again, these are broken up by the different area median income ranges. That is not to say that you're going to meet this goal in the next 5 years, or that, it is a big number to strive for, but it does give us a guide and to look at where those units fall within those different income categories to try to create a diversity of housing types. So when we look at the types of, again, this report is very detailed, but I wanted to show kind of where the gross rents are by the market in this area. And you can see that a lot of the rental units right now are in the price range of $2,000 a month or less, according to this chart in Traverse City. And the majority of the need are for those making about $44,000 a year or less.
Can I ask a quick question about that, the data there? The, let's say 750 and below, because you've got that broken up. Yeah, that number, I mean. And forgive me if I blanked on this and you already mentioned it, but do we know if most of those are subsidized in some way? I think we've all heard the stories that it's hard to find a rent below $1,000, let alone $1,200 most of the time. And so just as we're getting presented with this data, so people aren't saying, well, there's those $500 ones out there. Those are really subsidized ones through programs, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
and on the next slide, talks about the availability. And so he did do an assessment of as many multifamily units as well as not multifamily rentals, so duplexes or single units. And you can see the vacancy rate is about 5 in this case.
And sorry, that's why I was clarifying, because again, it's saying it's there, but it has these caveats tied to it a lot of the time.
Yes, and I apologize, there's a double text box there. But what I'm trying to say in this slide and then across the board is that in our region, there's about a 0.7% vacancy rate. And in this case, according to when he looked at these units at that time, there was only 5 available units out of 845. So that does show that there really is a limited amount of supply. And then when you look at the availability home prices and what's available, most of those that are for sale are $400,000 or more.
Yarrow, quick question for you. You said the city of Traverse City's vacancy rate is 0.7?
Not Traverse City specific, that's
Okay.
across the region.
That's across the
and
region.
I did not
Okay.
do the math for this, but this chart is to show you that of all the multifamily units.
There's
that
5.
There's
At
5.
this snapshot in time when this was done.
Yes.
What is, in the housing world, what is considered to be a healthy vacancy rate?
4 to 6%.
4 to 6. Okay, thank you.
So just to be doubly clear, for this particular slide in that lower table, the 5 out of 845, that is within Traverse City limits?
Yes, this is from Traverse
Okay.
Cities, yeah. But there is one for Grand Traverse County as well.
But
yes.
just so,
Yes.
thank you.
I hope so. I'm 99% sure.
Thank you.
I've been creating a lot of these reports, so. So I guess want an overview of the housing data before we move into the tools and say that a lot of the reason we're gathering this data and why we need this data is to be able to, we can't mandate affordability, but it's to be able to show how we can create more density and more housing opportunities across that income spectrum. So we do need market rate homes, but we also need a lot of homes for those who are below, making 50% of the area median income. We also need homes within the 80 to 120. So I highlighted some things. I don't want to just read this slide to you, but I think I've mentioned most of them. But I think though highlighted in yellow is really where I want to focus, is that we do have a limited number of non-conventional rentals in the region or in Traverse City. And as a result, there's just a really low inventory of rentals for those who live and work in the city. I think Sean's, I apologize, it cut off at the bottom, but I don't think I can even read that. But it also looked at, I can read it here, to identify as many possible opportunities and sites for residential development was a recommendation of this report, so that there could be enough opportunities to create these housing units. I was not on the right side. Okay, that's the overview. Here's the next one I was talking about, the recommendations. So he really pointed out in this report, which I liked, is where there's a SWOT analysis, not for the city, but for the county as well, and what the opportunities are. And this really talked about emphasizing projects and supporting projects with a variety of affordability levels. So that is why, zoning reform is so important, so that we can increase that density where it makes sense and where there are more opportunities for people to consider housing, given that 3,100 number for Traverse City. Did I miss anything? Okay. So now we're going to talk about the tools, and this is where I'm going to bring in Tracy a little bit, but I did just want to mention the deed restriction program we have for year-round housing at Housing North. So this is relatively new. It was modeled after the Vail and Deed program, but if the city had a goal to ensure that there was year-round housing, first of all, a lot of the tools require that I'm going to talk about to be year-round housing, but if there were projects or a citizen wanted to have a deed restriction for just year-round housing to avoid that conversion to a short-term rental, we do have a program and we're open to discussing that. It is not an affordability deed restriction. It's really just for year-round housing, and right now we hold, that should actually say 7, the 8th one is in progress, but we hold 7 of them in the city of Charlevoix.
Can you explain that just a little bit?
Yeah, so it's not like a conservation easement, so it's not necessarily tax deductible if you're paid for it, but it is a permanent deed restriction that's tied to the land. And the way that we monitor and enforce it is to see whether or not it switched from being homestead to non-homestead. And really the intent is to have a year-round occupancy, so it could be somebody that owns it but doesn't live there, but they have a year-round renter, or that they live there and are part of the community year-round. They can still travel, be retired, go somewhere, for a while, but it can't be converted to a short-term rental.
And who holds that deed restriction?
Housing North.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a person write this morning and say they were interested in that.
The city could be the one to do it, or you could work with Housing North as a partner. Where we rely on our city partners is to help with that enforceability and to understand, if that tax, the structure changed.
Can I ask sorry, Linda, are you set?
That was it. Yep.
Okay, just a really quick question. It hasn't reared its ugly head lately, but I don't ever trust that it'll fully go away. But we've had rumblings in Lansing over the last couple of years of groups trying to say, let's get rid of all the local control over short-term rentals and open things up in various ways. If something is in this kind of deed restriction, that would overrule any state change like that, or would that then be subject?
That is a good question. We're still working with our
Okay.
legal counsel on case law. I mean, it is tied to the deed, and so technically, unless the parties disagree, so in the deed restriction we have, there have to be 3 parties that would agree to reverse that.
I've got Lauren over here with her
There
hand
are
up.
several cases that speak to this. The ones that have bubbled up are homeowners associations, where there's a master deed that says there can't be any commercial use of the properties. They have to be residential uses. And those courts have almost universally said that short-term rentals are not a residential use.
Okay,
They're a
okay.
commercial use. So there is some case law on this. It would also depend a whole lot on, what the legislation is that came out of Lansing. But it's a deed restriction is separate from, some of those other type of zoning or other regulations.
Thank
So-
you, and just because it's, sorry, Nate, go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, I was just going to say, just because I asked a crystal ball question to clarify to everybody, so to Lauren's point, there isn't wording out there or anything out there to compare this to, but that was kind of the answer I was looking for, so I appreciate it from both of you.
Well, and the idea is that, we would, monitor and enforce that, and hopefully the person who donated it, the first owner, would be easy to work with, but usually you run into issues as the property changes hands.
Okay.
I could just offer a clarification. I really just want to make sure it's stated publicly that you can argue that people sneak it through or that we don't have enough enforcement on it, but short-term rentals are not allowed
In
in residential R1 and R2. So just to be clear, but back to what Mayor Pro Tem Shamro said, there has been efforts for years in Lansing to try to take that out of our control. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I would also point out that this is not necessarily a short-term rental tool. It is for year-round housing. So in the city of Charlevoix, they only have 38% of their residents that live there year-round, and so they want more year-round residents. So it's both a tool for short-term rentals, but also if you want to have more year-round occupancy in your community, that's another tool.
Do we have any idea where Traverse City's at on that?
It is in the report, and I was going to follow up with Sean. So the seasonal workforce study that Networks Northwest had, we didn't ask the study to include that, but it does give an idea of the the occupancy and whether or not they're seasonal in Traverse City, and it's, I think if I remember, it was like about 12%, but it wasn't as high as I was expecting, probably because you have an ordinance.
So the deed restriction is, so it's not to be used for short-term rental, but it's not a deed restriction that it's their primary residence. So it could still be somebody's second, third, fourth home.
If they're renting it to somebody year-round. The goal is for them to get the homestead exemption and to be a year-round resident of the community. So
Primary residence.
Yes, a primary resident.
So, no, that's important. I think that
Yes.
gets lost, because if it's somebody's second home that just sits empty, it's not a short-term rental, but it's not contributing, it's just sitting empty.
You're right. However, you could be a second homeowner, put the deed restriction on, and we would have to verify that you are renting it to somebody year-round,
Got it.
if
Thank
that
you.
makes sense.
Yep, thanks.
Any other questions about the deed restriction program? We're learning and growing it, and it's something that, we do want to study more, but it is an opportunity, and if somebody wanted to engage, we have examples you can look at. So this one I am not going to really talk about. I'm just going to tease you with the slide because we don't have the rules for it, but this is a brand new tool that is coming out, available now for housing. You probably heard me talk about it years ago. It's about to be official on September 29th. And there are 3 trainings that we hope somebody from the city or other communities will attend. I believe the 9th is the one that's targeted towards units of government, but anyone is welcome to attend any of those. The links on here go to the statute as well as some information on MSHDA's website. So we will be working on bringing this to communities once we understand more, but we're not quite ready yet. And we know, you're already set up and are familiar with TIF districts, but many other communities in our region, this would be a new opportunity for them. I just wanted to make sure you're aware. And then on the next slide are the tools that I'm sure you've heard about, we've talked about, but I just wanted to give you kind of how my brain works to make sure I understand these tools, and the links to each of those go to a fact sheet about them. So there's 2 new tools and then expansion of tools, and the Brownfield TIF is one of those expansion tools, as well as a pilot that you are working on. So thank you, you're already making a lot of headway. And then the other one is neighborhood enterprise zones. And so I am gonna see what my next slide is and just give Tracy an opportunity to come up here. She's working in Manistee right now on neighborhood enterprise zones, which is a goal of their housing action plan. And I won't go into pilots because I think you're so familiar, but just wanted to remind you and thank you that you're working on an awesome ordinance for your community. And here's Tracy.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I am working on the neighborhood enterprise zone, which our goal really is to have spur new development for vacant properties or properties that have not had a chance to have development, but also for the rehab, preservation, and stabilization of homeowners and their properties. And although I started this before the new housing tools became available, there is a NEZ tool that is directed. You don't have to be a obsolete property or a distressed community. The new tool really looks at the district having access to municipal water and sewer. So that's one of the main criterias. And then we are also working on some of those other tools, which are the residential housing district and the attainable housing district as well. And those tools really dependent upon the number of units in a development. So, for example,
So this is just an example of the kind of 2 different areas.
yeah, so the NEZ does need to be plotted lots that are contiguous. They have a whole guide on the different things that you do need to follow to enact what that is, but the council would determine what that district was. There does need to be a percentage of, I think it's a maximum of 15% of your residential housing that could be in that zone, but it can exceed that. You could have multiple zones if you choose to. But again, you can't exceed 15% of your residential housing. If we talk a little bit further, and I think the Residential Facilities Act and the Attainable Housing Act, those both, as well as the NEZ, under the new housing rule, do need to be year-round housing, and the Act also stipulates that it needs to be up to 120 AMI. And in this community, your AMI 80 to 120 is $71,000 to $107,000. So that is a requirement of the Act, so that it couldn't be anything, market rate and above. And again, the unit of government determines the district. It determines also the terms, length of terms. So an NEZ, for example, could be 6 years up to 17 years. And then the different acts specify that the length of that term. And again, you have some leeway to determine that district's length of term for the tax abatement. And with that, it also is the different tools, the NEZ, the Residential Facilities Act, and the Attainable Housing, all can be stacked with a TIF as well. So you could have multiple abatements that occur. And again, it is all dependent upon the number of units. For example, Attainable Housing is only under 4 units. A Residential Facilities Act, you need to have 5 units or more. I think the other thing that we just wanted to make sure that, so after the terms of for example, if you decide 17 years would be in the Residential Facilities Act, the terms that you choose, after that 17 years, we're hoping that there can be some type of mechanism so that it doesn't then convert away from either that year-round or 120 AMI. So those things are still in the works. Something like a deed restriction may be an answer, but again, those mechanisms are still things that we have to work out because, again, these tools are new.
This is just a case study of how, so the idea behind these abatements is to be able to provide rents or for sale prices that are attainable enough to those within the 0 to 120% of the AMI. So being able to lower that overall for sale price or some of those rental amounts per month that wouldn't be passed on to the tenant. So this is just kind of an example of how it would work for somebody who wanted to invest in their community and build a duplex and how they could be part of an NEZ. This is just a little summary about how and when to use a tool. So I believe in Cadillac Lofts. That's an example in our region. They have a neighborhood enterprise zone for Cadillac Lofts, but they also have a TIF attached to that for when the terms of that neighborhood enterprise zone are done. So that's just an example. So our understanding right now, today, because this could change, is that there are 3 tools that could be used with a TIF, and then what tools are used for multifamily, and then what are less than 4. So this is kind of a broad brushstroke. I know Lauren is already working on some language. Manistee, Traverse City, other communities we're looking to you to try these tools and see how they work and see kind of what the community wants as well for these tools. So happy to answer any questions about the tools before I turn it over to Warren, but really just want to emphasize these are options for units of government. You can dial them up or down and decide which ones work given the housing needs assessment numbers and then the housing goals for the city. So any questions about the tools before I pass it over to Warren?
Yeah, so many questions. Holy cow. So do cities have someone on their staff? Is this the planning department? I mean, who keeps up on this stuff? Are we all supposed to be all knowledgeable on all these things and be able to?
Not us.
I'll let Nate answer that.
Yeah. Who does this?
So
Yarrow.
it depends on the size of the community in general. We had, in a much larger community in southeast Michigan, I mean, we had staff, you had your planners, but we also had community development staff that focused on CDBG, for example, which we are now going to be an entitlement community and getting funds directly, and some of those other types of programs. I think ultimately, as we've been kind of talking, looking at where your priorities are and where your resources are, what are those needs that are vacant? I mean, you're fortunate that you've got a partner in Housing North. I'm not one to ramp up staff for ramping up staff's sake. I mean, if the commission today and tomorrow are interested in pursuing some of these different programs, my suggestion would be you find out what we can leverage from Housing North first and then see where the void is here on our staff. There is probably a role to do some things differently when it comes to community development and planning, when it comes to how it's staffed and what programs we're working on. Again, I'm going to go back to CDBG because that opens up a lot of paperwork, and if there's a lot more programs that are out there that we are potentially going to be participating in. Do we have the capacity for that? And I'll just tell you right now, no.
Yeah.
That's a pretty easy question to answer. So,
Right.
long answer to your short question, it depends.
Okay, and going back to you then, you have said to me repeatedly, maybe the county needs to have a representative to you, or something. What is the position you always say to me?
We're working on bringing our Housing Ready program to
That's
Grand
it.
Traverse County. And we believe we have enough funding to do that for 1 year next year, pending a few things coming through in the next couple weeks. So that person would be like Tracy in Grand Traverse County, a dedicated staff person to help with all things housing. Will they work for the city and help you with your monitoring enforcement? That would be something we'd have to, negotiate, or income verification. But I think they could help, build those programs and figure out what it would take, and then basically help set the stage for how these tools would work. So that's what we're doing in other communities, including Emmett County and Charlevoix County.
And has the county now approved that?
We have not formally asked Grand Traverse County. The funding that we are going to be getting for this position is through private foundations and actually the state of Michigan for 1 year to expand our Housing Ready program to hopefully build that support. But I will be hopefully getting in front of the Grand Traverse County Commissioners as soon as they invite me. I have asked.
Great, thank you.
Are you willing to share the cost of 1 year for that position?
Yes,
Roughly?
it kind of ranges. We do fundraise for about $100,000 a year for 3 years. That's how we've built the program in other communities. We're looking at changing that model and providing more of a as needed sort of technical support, but then also contracting versus adding staff, because we only have 1 year of funding. So that's what I know now, but I believe we would focus on that if we could build the program for at least 3 years to be most effective. That it is needed. We're in Charlevoix and Emmett. We're in our second term of our 3rd-year term.
Thank you.
And is there anything the city can do to encourage the county? Or the county doesn't need to be encouraged? You're going to come and say, look I've got this money and I can give you this service.
Possibly. I will probably be asking for direct, contracts for services, when it makes sense and when we're ready to bring it, and we need the resources. Right now, we know that there's a high need, and we've gone directly for funding, but hope to be able to ask for that at some point, both the city and the county and all the townships and villages in the county.
Follow-up kind of related question. It says unit of government on a lot of these, and we're talking about the county, which would be great to have them join in the conversation as well, but is this something that the townships can opt into as well and on a case-by-case basis?
Yes.
Great.
It's for all units of government, but there is going to need to be county buy-in and approval for some of these tools as well. I should mention that. So that's where we'll be doing the work, with the county to encourage them to come alongside the other units of government and support these tools.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Warren now, and I'll wrap up.
Thanks, Yarrow, and thanks, Tracy. Good evening. Thanks for having us this evening. I know that that's a lot to go through, and Yarrow has provided, obviously, overwhelming a number of details. It's really, going back to that point, and I'll touch on it in a minute as well. In addition to Housing North, we're hoping that we can bring other resources to bear to help communities develop these. And I think, as Yarrow said, the positions in Manistee County, Emmett County have proven to be very valuable. So we're going to continue to advocate with the county to support that. I want to touch on a couple of key things here. The first is, and I'll give some more details in a later slide, but stress the regional nature of both the data and the need. You know, the city has been proactive in hearing these concerns, but we know that the city can't address, you know, the concern itself, and this really has to be a regional approach. So while we are here presenting before you tonight, we are actively working and trying to encourage other units of government to come alongside as well, because the city can't do this alone. The second thing is that I would reiterate that these new tools are a direct result of lawmakers hearing citizens' concerns. Finally, could be another way to put that. And it's really important that we do our best to utilize these tools now that we have the opportunity. So a couple of things that we wanted to touch on from a standpoint of importance. You know, why are these tools so important? And from an economic development standpoint, I think there's a couple of key things that you're aware of, but I think is worth reiterating. The first is that obviously economic and community stability is all about future workforce. The future of economic development, the future of community development is about creating places that attract talented people and providing a quality environment. That is obviously the reason for a number of the projects that we work on, obviously Housing North and other partners. It's also the driving force behind the governor's Growing Michigan Together Council. And really the key thing here is we are in a direct competition with other regions, other states, other parts of the country for the workforce of the future. And that is really the number one goal. And success is dependent on really attracting those young workers and families. That is really going to be what separates successful regions, successful cities from those that kind of lag behind. And as is probably no surprise to anyone, housing is the key barrier that we face right now in attracting and retaining our working age population. That is, there's other things, certainly. There's other things that need to be worked on, but this is the number one thing that comes up. And we hear that from both employers and current workers, as well as those who are considering moving here for work. So it's across the board the biggest issue that is mentioned. And as Yarrow's touched on, housing needs span the spectrum, right? It's everything from ADU apartments to larger homes, because we hear everything from, you know, the just graduated first-year teacher to the veteran hospitality worker to the six-figure professional, that it's an issue. So it's all kinds of housing across the board, and I think that's really important as you consider everything from using these tools to zoning changes for ADUs. It really is a broad spectrum. I've shared this graph in an earlier report, but I think it's worth repeating. When we ask quarterly a survey that goes out to about 7,000 business leaders representing over 1,000 companies, what's the single biggest barrier to growing your business? What is mentioned, and this is the most recent quarterly report, staffing and attainable housing are the two things that are mentioned at the top of the list. And I would reiterate that staffing is oftentimes directly related to number two, the housing. So, and again, that is across all industries. It's not in this packet with you tonight because I didn't get it until late last week, but I also wanted to touch on the results of a separate survey that was just recently conducted. This was from the Detroit Regional Chamber and Business Leaders for Michigan. Business Leaders for Michigan is a statewide organization. They conducted a survey that went across the entire state. So even it's Detroit Regional Chamber sponsored, but it was across the entire state. 618 to 29-year-olds, and this was in August. So it's recent data. And it's related again to population growth, retaining and attracting young people. The good news is that of those current Michigan residents, over 80% said they would prefer Michigan over other locations. So they want to stay here. Okay, that's the good news. The challenge is when they're asked what is the biggest factor between in deciding between staying in Michigan and looking at a different location, affordability of housing was the number one issue that they mentioned. So it is directly related to, again, our economic and community development, that we need to be able to attract and retain these people. So that touches on some of the demographic specifics. So for millennials and Gen Z, so obviously younger people, some things that really stick out and these are demographic shifts between earlier, older generations. Number one, they're having fewer kids, and they plan to have fewer kids, okay? That's not probably a surprise to anyone. Number two, they have grown up in very challenging situations with their personal budget, whether it's getting started during the Great Recession or, the job loss during the pandemic, the inflation that we're currently dealing with, the housing prices across the country. Very challenging. Student loans is another big issue. So very challenging personal finances. And then the third thing is, and we see this borne out in a number of surveys, they value experience over stuff, including the size of their house. So efficiency housing, think all types of smaller housing, whether that's apartments, ADUs, et cetera. Efficiency housing in various forms will be in high demand for the foreseeable future. So I think, again, that's a key thing for you to consider as you work through this process and think about these tools and the other options available to you. Before I go on, one quick thing that I wanted to touch on, because Jarl mentioned it, MISTA updates. So the resolutions authorizing both brownfield and the TIF changes are set to be approved at our board meeting this Friday. So that's where Jarl's ready to go as soon as that gets approved. The other thing that I would mention, the regional housing plans will be a part of a MISTA study session at the board retreat this Thursday. So that's, again, something, Housing North in our region is the lead on that. And so we'll be looking through what does each region need to do to address housing. So again, regional focus, bringing some of these numbers to bear at the state level. And then at the last board meeting for MISTA, I think it's important to reiterate for anyone that didn't see that, we approved the new qualified action plan, which made 3 important changes. One was specifically more detail about calling out rural-specific scoring for awarding MISTA housing projects. The second thing...
Wait, what was that?
Rural? Rural, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Rural housing, yes.
Okay.
Differentiation between rural and urban housing, and then how they can be scored for awarding projects.
Got
it. The second thing is more focus on what MISTA calls developing, emerging developers. So in general terms, that means non-large developers. So more homegrown developers, smaller developers that can access, they're trying to help these smaller developers access these tools in a more effective way. And then the third thing is the elimination of the walkability score, which had often been an issue for regions such as ours, as we look at getting MISTA projects approved. So those are 3 improvements in the low-income housing programs that will be beneficial to the region as we move forward. Again, just approved. If I go to the next step here, this is also, and kind of, again, going back to Commissioner Colbert's question, we're trying to help support the city and other partners in utilizing these tools, in learning about these tools, and working forward. So we hosted in the first day of August a work group. The mayor was in attendance, Commissioner Treadwell, other planning and housing commissioners were there, as well as some regional experts. And we worked through how do we start addressing the issue, right? With these new tools, with all the things that are going on. And so what you see here is a draft immediate action plan that was developed with that group. And I'm going to misspeak. This is the draft that was put forward. The meeting was actually in July. It outlined 3 initial steps. I won't go through every detail on this chart, but helping to communicate what is now available and the need that is available. So this presentation tonight is part of that communications plan. Number two, identifying the districts in the city where housing tools can best be deployed and utilized, both given the details of the tool and also the comfort level that that neighborhood has with the different developments that could be utilized. And then, again, going back to the regional issue, re-engaging the regional joint housing task force. Jarl convened that meeting earlier this month, and went through some of the toolkits that are available, making sure that the townships are engaged in this process. The other thing I would mention about this workshop was that all the detail you just saw on the new tools was even more detail was given to that work group. So we are trying to help educate and support everyone in this process. So that's the key things that I wanted to share. I would reiterate that the business community sees this as something that they want to support and they need to support because this is the key issue affecting, frankly, their bottom line. And so as you've seen, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit companies, trying to frankly develop their own workforce housing, building their own workforce housing, buying their own workforce housing, they are ready to engage as a partner with public sector partners to address these issues. And I'll pause there and see if there's any specific questions you have for me before perhaps we do more of a general Q&A with Yarrow as well.
I guess I would just say I'm really glad to see the Regional Joint Task Force to re-engage it, because that's something I've been hoping to see for the last few months, so I'm glad that came out of that group.
I could say the meeting there was quite lively,
Yes, it was.
as it was.
All right, Yarrow, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like to mention?
Is Traverse City is an RRC certified? Okay.
Yeah.
One thing Tracy just reminded me is that as you move forward in recertification, utilizing some of these tools are helping to incentivize projects with below 120% of the AMI, I believe will be a requirement of recertification. So I just wanted to mention that. And I think the last thing is, I didn't have my cool picture with our proud.
Just
for
really
the
quickly for the
public.
people at home, RRC is
Sorry.
Redevelopment Ready Community.
Redevelopment Ready Community, and that is a program through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So we're having a housing summit at the end of the month. There'll be a lot of more in-depth workshops on this, and I think one of the two things that might be important for any elected official or community member is we are going to be talking about housing funds. So there'll be a workshop on different housing trust funds. There'll also be a funders panel this year and a couple workshops on how to develop a pro forma and do site planning. So we're hoping small-scale developers will come, and we'll also have MISHDA there doing a 2-hour workshop on their new programs and some of these tools as well. So today's the last day for early bird registration. I sound like I'm advertising. But please sign up, and if you want to learn more about the summit, we also have a few scholarships still available for students or anybody that, it's not within their budget that would like to email me and let me know. And the last thing I'll say is this is just a link to the different resources and tools that are on our website. So hopefully this PowerPoint was in your packet. You can just click on those and learn about some of the other programs that we're developing and hoping to bring to other communities. So just want to thank you for your time and see if there's any other questions.
So both of you mentioned that we need a wide range of housing, from six-figure income people to people below AMI. And you said that there was a chart somewhere of occupations?
Yes, it's in the housing needs assessment.
I would love to see that, because I think it's important for people to understand that we are not just trying to house people who work in service downtown, that people coming in as executives or doctors or other things into the community are also having a hard time finding housing. That's correct, right?
Yes, and I'll share that with Nate and then get it out to you, that specific chart.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I could share just anecdotally, we have a major business in the community here that has just had a manager candidate turn down the offer that I believe was $95,000 because of housing.
think that's other things that we have experienced too, is we're trying to find staff just to go to work for the city. So we think we had one individual that I understand left after he'd been here for a while, but because he couldn't find housing, he had to go back. So in a certain department that we've been struggling to try to find employees. So it's not just out in the business world, it happens in the government world also. So that's where we are. Okay.
I have one other question. This may be off topic because it's not here, but in my head, I was muddied on the deed restriction, and it was because I was remembering something had happened in Aspen that had deed restrictions for the value of your home. Is that something we have around here? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure about that deed restriction.
I'm looking at it right now
Okay.
on their.
I think it's probably similar. So they have, I believe, a millage to support that in Aspen. They also have one in Vale. And so they purchase deed restrictions to make sure that people can stay in them year-round. We're not in that position right now, but that is something that if we had funding, we could offer a payment for them. But that's what they do in Vale and Aspen.
Okay, thank you.
To keep their year, and they actually tie that to living in the county as well. So right now, we haven't tied it to the physical location because so many people migrate and move through, but we've considered that in sort of a region like in Char M, if they wanted to retain employees, in that particular region, could we monitor and enforce that deed restriction?
Yeah.
But, it does slightly impact the overall value of the property because you can't, sell it as a short-term rental. And we're still trying to understand how those, values are determined and how much it would impact. So we don't go into it promising anything except that you kind of put one on right now because out of the goodness of your heart, it makes sense.
Thank you.
We do want to, one thing we do want to thank Yarrow and the staff for is their work in Lansing to get these new housing programs passed, at least at that step. Now, getting into the details where you got to work through all that. And as all of us up here know, we're going through the first step on the pilot project. We're excited to get that passed. I know it's something we thought about or we heard about a year ago. We thought, wouldn't that be a great idea to help us out? And here we are getting ready to adopt that, which I feel like that, as we get that adopted, the commission feels like they want to move on with that in time. It is our basis to how we can move on with it moving forward. So thank you for your all's efforts in working with our legislatures and also the work you did in Lansing to get these things passed. At least it's one tool, and again, it's a tool in the toolbox, whether it gets utilized or doesn't get utilized, but at least it's there for us to use for our consideration. So thank you. All right, any other questions or thoughts? There's a lot of data and stuff in here. The full report is on your website too, is it not? So if you have some probably trouble sleeping at night, it's probably good reading, I'm sure, to help that out. So please take advantage of it. I'm hoping if there a way that we could put this presentation, well, I don't know if it helps without anyone here on our website so they can look at it if they want, instead of having to go just to our agenda packet, at least for the next couple weeks or a few weeks, they could look at some of the needs. So,
We'll make it happen.
thank you. So it helps. All right. Is there any other question we have for them? Okay. Well, I'm going to open it for the public if they had any comments they wanted on this particular topic, and then I'll open it up for public comment on anything else.
We ask that you state your name and address, indicate if you're a city resident, non-city resident, and/or city business owner. We have a 3-minute time allotment per speaker. When your time has elapsed, the timer will beep, and we request that all language be respectful to all parties.
Jess Reed, 630 Cottage Drive, Apartment 1B, Traverse City, Michigan, resident. Yes, on to the deed restrictions. I remember when Jim Crowlers was on this city commission, and I did say something to him about that with the incident on Garfield Avenue with the Trailside 45, and on how that was a kind of a debunkle of epic proportions because there is no deed restriction tied to that property. Well, that developer decided, well, people want to own things. Definitely. So we're gonna tell you got 30 days till we're gonna kick you out, or else you need to buy a condo. So I'm gonna repeat this again: is for this city commission, any new city commissioners, is as a tool that needs to be looked at as deed restrictions that are on properties. Thank you.
Again, I will emphasize, he keeps wanting to bring that project up, but government was not involved in that project at all. It was all done in the private sector. You know, there was an agreement. The agreement was lived to, and then when everything was paid off, the agreement was over with. That did not have public people want to think that the city or county was involved in it. We were not. So it's not an apples and apples comparison. Okay, do you want to talk about this subject or for public comment? Okay, that's fine.
Caroline Kennedy, 1925 Seneca Street. And I just want to say...
Caroline, why don't you put the screen down
so
you
people
can see?
can actually see me?
The cameras have a hard time seeing.
It's never going to change, is it? So Caroline Kennedy, 1925 Seneca Street. I'm really excited. I mean, I've known that we've had all these tools available, and I've just been chomping at the bit. I used to sit on the board at Northern Homes Community Development Corporation and worked with Jane up there, and they had some wonderful deed restriction programs that were very successful up around the Petoskey area. I think she had some she was working on in East Jordan. And what's exciting to me about this, and I hope this is where we can keep the focus in our 8 square miles, is we do still have some very small and modest housing stock in certain neighborhoods. And that is the stuff that's being purchased by those cash buyers, because of course they can't buy what they want either. And then we experience that gentrification that makes it less affordable ever. And this is our opportunity to identify those properties, get our funding together, and help keep those properties in an affordable state and rotating that way. I know that deed restriction program that I'm familiar with is different than what you're speaking about. And so maybe that's, you know, something else we can add to the conversation at Housing North perhaps during your
Caroline,
summit.
talk to us.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I get
Okay.
all passionate. But anyway, maybe we talk more about it at the Housing Summit or something like that, where it's more open to discussion. But it's just a really exciting time for us, I think, to help protect and save some of the housing stock that we need the most. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. We all good up here? A lot of homework. All right, we'll open this up. That's it for tonight on our stuff, on all of our items. Open this up for public comment on anything you would like to address. And make sure you go through, have we said the rules for public? Oh, you did? Duh. I'm still in the UP, so, okay.
It's a good place to be.
Okay. Anybody else?
Me again. So I just want to make a comment about the safe routes to school between Division and Silver Drive. We had an incident over this weekend. One of the beta stops got vandalized right next to Stella's. And part of the problem is, it's actually a two-part problem. For one, the property owner, the Maravinis, don't hire security. I've asked for security for the last 11 years, and the answer is, well, see, it's up to the property association, and that's the only answer that I get. And the other thing is, I know that there was some talk about lighting along the safe routes to school and security cameras. So this kind of validates that too, is to, maybe try to catch whoever is doing the vandalism over there. And I mean, like I said, it's a two-parter. It's it should be on the property owner to come up and say, okay, we need to take care of this with a solution. And the city, I think is doing a terrific job with clearing all that brush on Division Street, right next to the Pines. But I'm hoping that there's some more brush clearing along the safe routes to school between, at least where the city owns a property easement through there. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. With that, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you. Unless we don't get to make public comment here.
Totally.